So, welcome to priming. Now I'm going to be using the terms priming and undercoating synonymously throughout this video, even though they're technically not the same thing, and I'm going to merge them together and show you why. Now priming is simply preparing a surface for paint. Now the easiest way to think of priming is tape. Now tape has a smooth side and a sticky side. And priming simply changes the smooth side into the sticky side so paint will stick to it. Now undercoating is usually the next step in the painting process, and that undercoating is usually the dominant color of the piece that you are painting. Now it's possible for you to merge those two things so that the color of the primer and the color of the undercoating are the same thing. Now this is important that you don't create a problem for yourself later on by using a primer color that's going to be too dark or too light for the object that you're painting. For example, if I was going to be painting some snowy terrain or ice terrain, I would want to use a white undercoat, which then would be serviced by a white primer. I wouldn't want to use a black primer and then put a white undercoat over top of that, because I'm going to have to use many coats of white in order to get rid of that black primer. Now if I was able to merge those two together and I had a white primer and my primary color that for my snowy terrain is white, I've now merged my primer and my undercoat together. Now this can also create problems for you if you are using dark colors and you want to use bright things on colors on them later on. Now bright colors tend to be brought down in terms of their brightness by using a black primer. Just the same as if you use a white primer, the colors are brought up. If I was using something that was yellow on a black primer, it would be much more challenging to make that yellow stand out. So there are two primary ways to apply primer. One is by painting and the other is by spray, and I'm going to show you both. So we're going to be talking about brush-on primers and undercoats. So any information that I give in this video is strictly my opinion based upon my own experience, and anyone should feel free to question and disagree with what I have to say. So we're going to start with store-bought primers. I really like these, but they do have there's a specific place for them. They come in small bottles. This is only 18 milliliters, so it's not very good for big spaces. It also has a very limited color selection. However, these are great for miniatures. I would highly recommend these types of primers for miniatures. Now, I like to make my own primer and undercoat based upon acrylic paints. So these acrylic paints can be found anywhere in most craft stores and most dollar stores. They're relatively cheap, and I can use water with them in order to thin them out if I need to, but I can also thicken them up. Now, why would I want to thicken them up? So my primer gets the surface ready and my undercoat prepares my color. But what about the material that I'm building my project out of? So if I was building something out of styrofoam, this is expanded polystyrene, or just simply styrofoam, which tends to break apart quite easily. So if I was going to use this as a building material, I would want to absolutely reinforce this with my undercoating. I also like using polyethylene foam, otherwise known as packing foam. This is great stuff. It has a great surface texture in it. It holds its form really well, but I would reinforce it so that it becomes a little more rigid. I also would use a reinforced undercoat on something like extruded styrofoam. So this material is constantly falling apart at the table and is subject to all kinds of abuse, gets hit in the corners, and it just falls apart. So this absolutely needs to have some kind of reinforced, durable undercoat on it. So my favorite building material is this extruded polystyrene or just insulation foam, and this holds any shapes that you carve in it really, really well. And I like to use this as my primary basing material for all of my projects. So that's what we're going to use today. So I am going to use this on this particular piece, which I have created all kinds of little textures on. So this is going to be subject to all kinds of abuse at the table, not to mention when I pack it, it is going to end up having all these little ridges squeezed and pushed upon. So I want to reinforce this material and make this piece a lot more durable. So how am I going to do that? Well, I could mix PVA glue with acrylic in order to reinforce it. The PVA glue works really well, it's cheap, it's easy to find, and it mixes really well. I would also highly recommend a product called Podge. Now, Podge is slightly, in my opinion, better than PVA glue because it also acts as a sealer and it has a different finish on it. In this case, this is a matte finish. But it also comes in antique and glitter and fabric and outdoor, and it holds color really well, so it doesn't matter what color that I happen to mix with it, it will hold that color really well. Now, I'm going to be painting this like snow or ice. I'm going to make an ice wall out of this. So I'm going to want my primer and my undercoat to be white. Now, I could use the matte Podge in order to do that, but there's another product that Podge has put out, which is a gloss finish. Since ice and snow are shiny, I would use the gloss finish in order to make this product or this project stand out. So all I'm going to do is I'm going to mix these two things together. So I'll put some Mod Podge in. It really helps that the acrylic paint and the Mod Podge are the same color. And I'll mix them together. Now normally you can create a significant volume of this, but I'm just trying to do this little tiny piece here, so I'm not going to mix this up, or I'm not going to make a large volume of this. I usually mix this as I go, unless I happen to know that I'm going to be working on a large project, in which case then I will mix a large batch in an airtight container, and so that I have the same consistency throughout. And then we just paint it. Now when you paint this, make sure that you are always going with the grain. Now I'll probably end up just using my haste potion here. Make sure that when you're painting this that you're putting it in thick, even coats, and you're getting down into the little recesses there. And there we go. So then we should let that dry about 30 minutes. And while we do that, we're going to move on to spray-on primer and undercoating. So welcome to using spray primers. Before we get started, I would like to present you with two very important rules for using a spray primer or paint. Rule number one, Read and follow the instructions of the product. Rule number 2, when in doubt, follow rule 1. The instructions that the manufacturer has put on their product is not there simply for decoration. It is there for you to get the best results from their product. So make sure that you're following the instructions. Now, anytime you use a spray or an aerosol of any kind, you're going to want to make sure that you're in a well-ventilated area, preferably the outdoors. If you're indoors, even in a large area like a garage, or you have access to a spray booth, then you're going to want to make sure that you're wearing a mask and some gloves. The gloves are simply to reduce the amount of mess and cut down on the amount of fingerprints on your build if you're having to hold it. So anytime you're going to spray a surface with an aerosol, 2 things. 1, don't hold it too close, which we'll come back to that in a second. But the other is don't spray directly onto the object. What you want to do is start off to one side, press down on the nozzle, and drag your spray across the surface of your build. When you get finished, let go of the nozzle, drag it back, put it back to the other side, and press down and spray across again. This will create a smooth, even finish on your build. Now, in order to get the best results, how far away the primer is from the object matters. So whatever the instructions say, make sure you follow those. But the average is somewhere in the neighborhood of 8 to 12 inches or 20 to 30 centimeters. Now, you need to be aware that different manufacturers and different products have different nozzle shapes, which creates a different type of spray for each type. So the best way to think of this might be this spray pattern is to think of it like dragon's breath from your favorite role-playing game. Because that spray will affect the coverage on your build. Now, I don't like using aerosol sprays on styrofoam builds of any kind. I have been using these products for about 20 years, and I have yet to find a single one that I'm 100% happy with that will cover a styrofoam build of mine and not melt it. So the propellant inside the aerosol actually reacts badly to the styrofoam and will melt it. Now, you can use different products at different ranges, and I've yet to find one that I'm 100% happy with. So if you happen to know of one that you are 100% happy with, please mention it in the comments below and let the debate begin. Now, I also want to talk about temperature and humidity. Anywhere between 15 and 30 degrees Celsius, which I think is about 85, 86 degrees Fahrenheit, you're good to go in order to spray outdoors. Anything higher than about 30 degrees Celsius is going to affect the dispersion of the paint or the primer out of the nozzle. What actually happens is the heat is such that it actually shrinks the size of the spray as it travels from the can to the surface of your build, effectively drying it out mid-air. And this actually reduces the amount of coverage that you have on your build. So you can mitigate this problem by moving the nozzle closer to the surface of your build, but you got to be careful because you could end up creating splotches or pooling on the surface of your build because your nozzle is simply too close. You also need to remember in terms of temperature that simply moving to a shady area will not change the results due to the temperature. The area may feel cooler on your skin, but the air temperature is actually the same. That's the difference between air temperature and surface temperature. So make sure that you are in the right temperature zone as is described on the product instructions. In the colder months, if you happen to have those where you are, avoid any kind of aerosol spray below 0. Otherwise, when you spray your build, you're just going to be spraying little ice crystals at it, and that's not going to be what you're looking for. So, The humidity of when you're wanting to spray outdoors also is going to have an impact on the results that you get. So any kind of humidity above 85%, you're going to want to avoid an aerosol spray outside, because it will affect the amount of moisture on the surface of your build, and as your aerosol travels from the spray to your build, more moisture will cling to those particles, and it will affect the coverage of your build. You also want to make sure that if the dew point is within 3 or 4 points of the outdoor temperature, you want to avoid using aerosol sprays outdoors for that as well. Also, make sure that you follow the instructions on the product for in terms of how long you need to wait before you can actually start working with it again. The dry time will vary from product to product and manufacturer to manufacturer. So make sure you check those instructions as well. Lastly, when you are finished using this product or any aerosol product, you want to clear out the nozzle, and you do that by turning the can upside down and spraying the propellant out. When you start seeing no color, or the mist is colorless that comes out, you're just simply releasing the propellant into the air, and you've cleared the nozzle out. If you don't follow this particular step, you may end up in a situation where the paint has dried inside the nozzle, and you're going to end up having to either repair that or replace it. So I hope that you found the information in today's Foundations episode useful, and I will see you at the table.